Welcome back to Gale Force Wins Season 5.
Well, folks, welcome to Gale Force Wins. I'm in my backyard, and it is a very exciting episode for me because I have my very good friend from business school, Wayne Howlett, with me. The fact that we're actually in St. John's in the backyard where there's no wind and it's about 30 degrees, I'm actually sweating a little bit. That's one thing. That's exciting. But to have Wayne by my side is even more exciting. Wayne and I go way back to the 90s when we were in business school together, and some of the conversations, Wayne, that we've had have been very inspiring. And I think our intention here today is for the tables to be turned a little bit. Wayne's going to interview me, and then we're going to chat a little bit about, Wayne's focus on rural business and where he sees himself going. So with that, Wayne, trampling on your introduction, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, do you know, Gerry, it's 32 years that we graduated from Memorial University Business School. That's hard to believe when you look back at the 32 years, and the journey since and before 1993. I think it's I've been on here before with you, of course, yourself, and around various things. Like I think last fall we talked about potential windmill development in the Bay St. George. We talked about that openly in Stephenville. And we've talked on a more personal level prior to that, I think, in terms of where our histories and where we came from, in terms of our backgrounds. Yeah. And yours is, you interview people all the time, you've got your finger on the pulse of the province of Newfoundland Labrador, yourself and Allan, because you're attending all these trade shows, you're doing these types of interviews with CEOs and presidents of mining companies, energy companies, and so many others. Your good friend Charles Furlot. I see videos on with him. He's living in the Caribbean, I believe.
No, he's moved back now. He's up he's in Connecticut. Actually, in a couple of weeks, we're going down to do some work with the university that he's on the board of. Really exciting in Connecticut. Yeah,
I often see you talking with him on video and stuff. So it's very interesting people in terms of what they've done. So. And you're in that realm. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're learning about the mining industry, the energy industry in Newfoundland Labrador, and what are you getting in terms of, not the secrets, but what are you getting in terms of how you feel that leaders in the industries are feeling where we're going in this province, and how is it going to benefit us in a positive way?
Well, you know what, Allan? I'm on with Allan so much, I call you Allan. You've morphed in Allan. I love that question, Wayne, because Newfoundland and Labrador, I always say, is on the cusp of something very special. But why do I say that? Well, to your point, we've attended 6 trade shows in the mining sector. We've done energy shows. We've been in the construction business. We've done a seniors conference. The conferences are all very focused on the future. And you asked me about CEOs, not revealing any secrets. Here's what they are telling us. They're willing to invest in Newfoundland. To me, that says it all. Caliber Mining, which is now, I believe, called Equinox. They just changed names again. Ryan King said, I think they have $200 million invested. This is where I get excited, Wayne, when business people invest their money. That tells me, it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to take $200 million and put it into Newfoundland.
Well, that's action, isn't it?
It is.
That's people that are already talking about what could be. They're making it happen. They're implementing. And implementation, Thomas Edison always said, the vision without implementation is hallucination. And he's probably right. But these people have vision, but they're implementing those visions, and I think you have a front row seat in many ways in terms of your production company, Gale Force Wins, and the terrific work that you're doing, bringing that message beyond the front row of the theater, in fact, to the whole entire Newfoundland Labrador and beyond theater.
Well, you're right, Wayne, and that makes me excited. I think one of the shortcomings of the province is getting the information into the heads of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. I think people our age need to know it so that it can trickle down to the younger people, because I don't think the younger people realize the extent of the opportunity before them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and let's talk about value for a little bit, Gerry, because what you do, you disseminate that information. In today's world, getting information that we can rely on as accurate, in the world of false information that we get, and we all know what that's about. But you have authenticated, your authenticated media sources, really giving us facts straight from the companies. So it's not twisted in any way. It's a mere presentation of fact. But let's talk about the value of that, because what you're doing is a service, right? Your company, I guess, if you would agree, is in the service industry. It's a media services communications industry, right? How do you value what you do? Like, what do you put on your value? It's easy to say, we worked 100 hours and here's the, times whatever the costs and profits are, and this is the numbers. But how do you value things, say, maybe in a more realistic way, other than the tangibles? Like, what's the value of what you're putting out there?
Well, it's an interesting question, and you and I chatted a lot about this prior to hitting record. And first thing comes to mind is this particular conversation. The Gale Force Wins value started by myself and Allan chatting on Zoom, and every Tuesday night giving away a free conversation. This conversation, you're giving me your time, I'm giving my time to curate this conversation. So it's a very complex question, because, well, what's the value of that? To me, that, I'll start there, is the reason Gale Force Wins exists, because we have a Tuesday night 40-minute deep dive with someone about the journey, and this one's a little different. It's more of a conversation about the economics and the, Newfoundland in general, the opportunity. But there's incredible value to the listener, but also to myself and Allan, because we get energized by talking to people like yourself. Back more specifically to your question, what's the value? I think the value for Gale Force Wins initially was to shoot videos and give them to organizations. It's not about the spread of it on a network per se. That's not what we set this up for. We set this up because we just love having conversations. Someone who calls themselves a videographer would come in and do a video. One video might be $20,000. What Allan and I have been able to do is create a process where we can do anywhere from 10, 20, 30. Most we ever did in one day was 44 interviews in one day. What's the value? The value is not just that. It's the value of having that content such that you can actually disseminate it yourself on your network over the next year. I mean, if we do, for example, on average, you do 15 to 20 videos in a day. 20 videos in a day gives you half a year's worth of content. But it's even more than that, Wayne. A 40-minute conversation, a 5-minute conversation can be split into segments of, we call them win gusts. Our Instagram account is called Win Gust. What are the snippets of inspiration? This conversation you and I are having right now could be cut into 20 little snippets. When I get into your business, I'm talking about mine. Anyway, I'm going on a lot about this, but I'm so excited because the value is immense. And to throw in there, artificial intelligence. People have said to me, "Oh, Gerry, you're worried artificial intelligence is going to replace you." There's nothing, Wayne, that is going to replace the conversation that you and I are having right now. A person like you, grown up in Newfoundland, gotten a commerce degree, lived in Stephenville, has been an entrepreneur his whole life. That's authenticity. AI, I could punch in a few sentences about you and get a podcast created, but that's curated. The fact that I know you and the nuance of the language, and if I sense that you don't want to go down a certain direction, that's a whole other ball of wax. So last thing I'll say, and I know I've gone on a bit on this, is that the value that can come from the mining sector, for example, having done 6 trade shows in Newfoundland Labrador, extracting the spoken word, putting it through various AI tools such that it becomes data, is immense value to this province.
Yeah, I see that as a value added, really. If you think about, production and so forth, and value add to different product levels, in terms of the service that you're delivering there, not only you're taking their message and passing it, globally, but you're enhancing the value of that message through the processes of 20 interviews a day and the wind gusts that you speak of, I think it hit the right people at the right times. So it's for the company side, for your client side, you deliver a high level value for them. So their value is getting their message unobstructed, not changed, but getting their message to the what they feel is the accurate message. And I think that's what you're giving them, like being a spectator of your, of your company and watching the wonderful work you guys do, and the way you translate that message. There's the value for your clients, right? They're not just paying you for time. What they're really paying you for is the value that you're delivering for them. So the value they're getting out of it in terms of delivering their message for their industry, which I think is extremely positive in Newfoundland Labrador. Yeah. And I don't want to get into, I can't get into all the things that I'm involved in now, want to be in Newfoundland Labrador and going to be. But I think it's a tremendously positive future in many ways for all of us, I think.
Well, I've always been inspired by you. I mean, it's one thing to be in St. John's, population of 200,000. When you go into a smaller area, the opportunities tend to shrink. The fact that you've been able to carve out a really substantial career for yourself, your wife's done the same, it's an amazing thing to me. And I've always found it interesting, Wayne, to look at, if we talked about it, say, in concentric circles and population, the smaller it gets, the more challenging it is because there's not as many opportunities. That's why I'm personally so excited for this province when I hear about mining in Gander, the salt that's happening out in Stephenville area, the wind farm, we're not sure where that's going yet, but that, so tell me a little bit about your perspective about what I just said.
It's very difficult and challenging, because you're absolutely right. And I think if we weren't toughened up over the years in terms of seeing potentially fantastic projects not come through. And now in our area, we're used to that. We've had some, a few. What could be, earth-shattering economic benefits to the region. And it's very difficult to get over that last hurdle to get it there. Yeah. And another challenge with Newfoundland Labrador is, of course, their population. We're a big geography with not a lot of people. And when you leave the Avalon area, St. John's and the immediate area, population becomes very sparse. All we got left, there's a few major towns, small towns after that when you run across the province, right? But there's no major population group after that. So a lot of challenges, but if you only focus on the challenges, we're never going to implement anything, right? So it's, and we all got a role to play. It's if you spent 30 years as a, working in a K corporation and you hit your 30 years, you're 60, you want to retire, or everybody thinks you should, does it mean you retire, or are you really just taking all of that experience in education and school of hard knocks and transferring that into your next chapter and how you're going to help others? And how you're going to help this province continue to grow, right? And I think that's really the challenge for us, getting where we are in our careers. As I mentioned, we're 32 years graduated university alone, and have since, did an MBA and degrees in education. So, and you've done, similar things and taken a company from scratch in 5 years and really made it global, yourself and Allan. So, I think there's so much more to give, and we don't have to say, it's the old Colonel Saunders thing. You can be 60 or 65 or 55 and lead a long career doing kind of with the same company if that's what you did. It doesn't mean you just walk the block and plant some flowers. You can contribute 10 times more than you ever have in 30 years in the next 5. Because you've got a lot of experience and background to bring to that table. Yeah. I've had some conversations with younger people in business, over the last little while. And some feel that, back when we were starting our businesses 30 years ago, it was easier then, in many ways, right? And no, it's not. In many ways, it's easier now. We did it with very little information. Not even really just the cusp of the beginning of the internet.
I agree.
Only 30 years ago. And we had to do things that, a lot of manual things to figure things out. We didn't have the software to do it for us. So in some ways it's a lot easier, in some ways it's more difficult. That's normal. But one is not better than the other. So I think the life experiences that we've gone through, and I've been involved in a few different industries, and the amount of learning and things I've learned the hard way, and making mistakes in all those industries, I don't want to park that in something called retirement and do nothing with it. I've spent 3 decades accumulating that type of background. Now I need to figure out what do I want to do with that, in the next chapter. From now till we live to 100, you and I, and we live in the Caribbean.
Well, I'm going to 120 in my
Well, I hope we do. But our setting today, how much more beautiful can you get in St. John's, Newfoundland? And I think if we said we were in the Caribbean today, we would be, some might believe us.
I don't know can you see that? No. There's a thermometer here in the shade. It's 28 degrees in St. John's in the shade and almost no wind.
I'd say it's higher than that right now where we're sitting.
I'm a bit of a weather buff, but Wayne, back to your point there, and starting a business is never easy. But I would suggest when it comes to the digital realm, it's a fascinating realm that I think Canada must get better at. And I've been following the Council of Canadian Innovators, and the founder of RIM is one of the guys involved in that, and Craig Rowe, Craig Tucker, these guys. But the ability to create a business in Canada that has a digital footprint, and you think about that, like Allan and I have been able to travel around the world and curate a business using digital tools. That being said, there's nothing makes me more excited than being in Newfoundland Labrador. The time that we worked with you for the Green Hydrogen Rally and that, again though, that inspires me to be part of Newfoundland and help Newfoundland's culture and economics move forward. But it's all enabled by the ability for digital know-how to move a business forward, That's exciting, right?
And that's the reward. That's the value, right? So I guess what we're really saying here today, Gerry, is we've kind of shifted our conversation to value. Not just what do you do to make a living, or what have you contributed for the last number of years, in 5 years in Gale Force Wins, company growing steadily, becoming a much more broader recognized company name and logo and brand, right? That's your true value that you're developing. So I'm taking that kind of line of thinking here today, talking about how much more you can give after you've done your 30 years of accumulation of value. And because you don't, like some people in the province have $500,000 or $1 million, they want to invest in something. That's wonderful. That's creating value, right? And but you don't have to have that. I mean, just because you don't have $50,000 a day to throw into something doesn't mean that your 30 years of life experiences doesn't bring a very valuable piece to an investment, because it does. And I think when we look at investment and investors and what you consider to be investment for yourself, that doesn't mean you're going to have $100,000 and chip in with all the guys that got tons of money and the people out there with all kinds of money. It means you may be bringing forward your 30 years of developing that level of what is value and understanding what value is and how to deliver that value for those investors that may not fully get that. So there's so much value to bring forward, and I think that's the key word today is value. And it can be measured, it is measured in several different ways. It's not all about monetary value and economic return. It's about what do you bring to that piece of the equation. And you've got a lot, everybody out there has got a lot to bring to that table. And once you get to a point in your life and in your work life and you realize that, that's when you realize where, the word how comes into the equation. How do you do that? How do you create value? What do you do that creates that value, and how do you make it work? The word how comes up a lot in terms of conversations around consulting and stuff. Like, how do you do your systems? How do you do your leadership systems? If you do that, then how do you do that? How do you make that work? And that's kind of the thinking where that how digs into the value. It's all intrinsically tied together. How do you do it defines, maybe categorizes the value which is coming out of that. There's your value.
Look, you're peaking so many points that I reflect. If we're to just focus, say, on what my process is, and I'll back it up a little bit. We were on a call, myself and Allan, and a point about business partnerships. What Allan brings to the table is an intrinsic value that is really hard to measure sometimes. And my knowledge of video puts me in a forest where I can't even see the forest for the trees sometimes. His knowledge, and I'll give you an example. We were sitting on a call with a client, and Allan said, what if we shot the video edited it and posted it within an hour. Wayne, I can tell you that happened 4 years ago. I nearly fell off the chair. We hadn't had a conversation about it. He's thinking aloud in front of a client. And I said to myself, initially I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like, no one can do that. Holy, no. I'm Mr. Gerry Carew. Anyway, long story short, we gave it a shot. Guess what? Every trade show we do now, we shoot, edit, and post in the moment. Now, someone said to me, why don't you go live? Well, if this was live right now, let's say we're going live to 20,000 people, you and I would be a little bit like, oh man, you know, if I say something. So what the secret sauce that we've realized, and you talked about the how, we've realized that the authenticity of being able to have a video shot and edited such that if you say something or I say something that I want out, can come out, the relaxation, the authenticity, no notes needed, you know, makes a huge difference. But let me say this, I tell you, since Gale Force Wins has come into my life, and that very thing where we shoot, edit, and post in the moment, I think a lot about process, you know. And someone said to me the other day, you know, I was talking to a very well-known business person. We had just got back from Las Vegas, and this the second in command there said to me that, Gerry, in an email to me and Allan, that there is no one in the United States doing what you're doing. This local person, incredible business person, said to me, Gerry, I find that hard to believe. It's interesting, there's a drone flying over us.
A CNN, I think we're being watched.
Well, it could be. Someone is spying on us. What I would suggest to you is that I should have phrased it a little bit differently, is that no one is actually recording conversations, editing and posting in the moment. Lots of people are recording conversations, but here's the challenge, Wayne. If you were to get a video done for your organization, one video, there's committees get together and there's a conversation about it. It could be a month, it could be 2 months before the darn thing's released, and it's $20,000. Dispense with all that. You have 30. You said we have between us, we have 30 years each invested in our ability to articulate and think and navigate through businesses. Why does that need to be discussed in a meeting? You know, so the experts that are in a business are the experts. And I'll tell you, the defense sector really is the one that we started this at. It was DevSec in Halifax, and you think about the defense industry, it's incredibly, it has to be incredibly particular, and security has to be huge, and thinking about what's being said because you don't want to cause, anyway, long story short, Allan and I, in that process, created an ability to have videos go out within the hour. Anyway, again, back to my point is, what about Newfoundland? What can we do differently? Everybody has the ability to do what Allan and I do, but very few people are doing it because we have a process. What do you think we can do in Newfoundland? Where would you think we could take Newfoundland if, let's say, I don't know what percentage of the population is thinking about the value add, but if we could increase that by 10% every year, such that in the next 20 years, I don't know, maybe 80% of the population is in a value added mindset, you know?
Yeah, and you made an interesting comment there a little bit back. It's not presently being done in the United States. That's quite a common, isn't it, with nearly 400 million people. and I think, and the way we're going now, and quite frankly by force over the last 6 months as a country, not just here, but many countries, is we're forced to look at our own self-reliance and not being so relied economically or otherwise on others. Now, last year when I was in the States, and this is all part of the present political climate, but a year ago in April, we spent a couple of weeks in Florida. And as I was going into the like restaurant pubs on days like this, where I'd go in for lunch, you know, you might have a beer and chat with the owners, because they're usually in them small tourist place in Florida where we were, quite often the owners were there. And I had many conversations with the owners of some of these businesses, and all the time I was talking to them, I was thinking about your approach to things and how why couldn't we shoot a video in real time right there when I'm in that conversation? Put the video, say, hey, would you mind doing this? We can put this across the world. Absolutely. So those are the kinds of things where we become, if you think about Florida and the number of Canadians and Newfoundlanders in particular, and Labradorians that winter in Florida, I don't know with this current year, but in our history, we've spent a lot of time down there. There's a lot of Newfoundland Labradorians living in Florida in the winter months, a lot. So if we become a partner in that value, but through video, through the conversations like we're having with the owners down there, that radiates back to Newfoundlanders who live in that area, and we talk about the intrinsic values of the companies and these small businesses that are running down there, that's a positive for them, and maybe that in some way fits into their marketing strategies as they go to the how do they continue to develop their businesses, right? How do they grow their businesses? How do they interact with people who aren't Americans living there, who are Canadians? And there's a lot to be done in that perspective now in the coming years as we move through this turmoil and the fractures that have been created in the friendships of Canadians and Americans. As we bridge those and repair those, there's and build back that value, because there's so much value between Americans and Canadians in particular in this world of the value we bring to each other and how positive that is. And I know it's in turmoil now, but we got to get back to that. And I think our value perspective now becomes, how do we fit into the larger value perspective? So in the realm of value, Newfoundland Labrador, and I think tourism is a good example to look at. Hey, how does tourism fit in the world? Newfoundland Labrador tourism fit into this whole world of the broader value. How do we take our little piece of value driven and put it into that, what people are looking for in value, and what we give in value from those companies? And when you look at challenges, when you look at a small rural area that has a company that's surviving on accommodation sector and maybe the food sector, and what's different about that may be the two main things they have, aside from the the views and the water and so on. So, and hiking trails are probably equal piece in there. So, but if we're doing that and only looking at our value in small little areas, it would fence us up and not creating that broader value with fellow communities and the whole regional perspective of tourism, because Newfoundland Labrador is a pretty small region on the planet, right? But if you look at that as a region and start working together, much like the provinces are talking about reducing barriers to trade and working together, well, if we remove our barriers to start working instead of, I'm only going to do what protects my small little community, I don't want anyone to interfere with that, to a thinking of, I want bigger value for my community, so I have to partner with bigger, in a bigger way, with a bigger region. And we have to look at, that's going to be really good for me, really good for you, and the mentality I wants it all is not going to work. So it's about partnerships, building those partnerships and breaking down those barriers, right? And there's so many great ideas we could come up around tourism. How do we create value? Continue to create value. And new ideas to create new value.
Well, it's funny. I'll never forget, I was golfing out in Terra Nova one time. These two guys from Texas were with me, and it was about 15 degrees, and it was July, and I apologized for how cold it was. Why I did that, I don't know. And they looked at me, and I'm like, it's 120 Fahrenheit down there now, which is what? I don't know what that is, like 35, 40 degrees Celsius. They told me they were in Terra Nova for the cool weather. So that happened probably 30 years ago. And you know what, Wayne? What I love about tourism is it gives us the ability to have people from away in our province, and that interaction is almost as if we're traveling to their location, because we get then the information. But changing perspective, I think, is incredibly important to the future of Newfoundland and Labrador, right?
Absolutely, Gerry. And I think that's, really what it's going to be about if we're going to survive going forward, is what value are we bringing to the bigger global perspective. That's going to be the key in all our industries. It's about value. People are willing to pay, but what are they getting for that? They have to understand the value they're getting. We have to understand the value that we're giving. And there's been a lot of work in that area, but I think we've got a lot to do to get them on a bigger scale of value.
Well, I agree with you, and I do think that as these economic behemoths, we'll call them, like the gold and various things, Voisey's Bay was huge. Tom Patton did a thing out at Central Minex a couple of years ago and talked about the economic benefit of Voisey's Bay, Newfoundland and Labrador was massive and continues to be. what I see happening, Wayne, is that the more employment that happens, the more the population can grow. I think the better off Newfoundland will be, because we need our confidence. And I'll never forget it. Remember Jeff Sterling speaking to us at Memorial University? I know that meant a lot to me.
Never forget that, yeah.
He said that the challenge in Newfoundland, this was in 1992, Jeff Sterling came to speak to Memorial University at the One Entrepreneur Society. Wayne and I were there. And he said that, in Newfoundland, there hasn't been 100 years of full employment. He said until, like, the United States has had 200 years of full employment. The employment has been significant. When Newfoundland gets to that 100, we're not 100 years, but, full employment, 100% employment, the confidence level that will bring, I think, is incredibly important to this province. And a shift, hopefully, in thinking, because I do think we need a shift, a little bit of a shift, maybe a lot of a shift, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about, is that shift in thinking. Things are changing so rapidly now, we have to shift our thinking and change this rapidly as well, because the environment is shifting so rapidly around us, right? In terms of the things that we see, and you certainly see it in the digital age, in the media age, right? And with that speed has come a loss of credibility in some areas, right? A loss of confidence in the information we're getting. And I often refer back to the Peter Mansbridge era, if you're old enough to remember Peter Mansbridge running the national news for years. There was authenticity in what Peter Mansbridge was bringing forward on your TV, because he brought the negatives and positives, challenges and great things from all political parties, sitting governments and oppositions. He didn't take the sides. He presented you with the facts.
That's right.
So you could make your own conclusion if you wanted, but he gave you the facts. And that was an age of reporting that, that I miss, because I don't feel that's there anymore.
No.
I don't feel that. But I think that's when we were really flourishing as a country, when we could have open and constructive debate without hating each other.
Well, I think, look, having worked in the media industry for 30 years, that I lament the loss of the print industry in particular. However, there is life after that. I tell a lot of my former colleagues the fact that Gale Force Wins is an entity is an example of life after the traditional media. But I will say there's a caveat there, is that we tend to gravitate now down rabbit holes. So Gale Force Wins is a positive entity. There's a lot of others out there that you could go down, and it basically fulfills the negative, maybe, that if you're into somewhat of a negative, maybe conspiracy theories, whatever, all of that is being served up as well. So you're right. I do think the fragmentation of media has been problematic, and we need more positivity out there. On that note, you and I have talked about this. What I really love about you is your positivity. And I think down the road, at some point when I'm out on the West Coast, that we'll do some more of this and bring in some people that you identify, and maybe two of us will interview them. But I think that the curation, Wayne, of a conversation, like people say talk is cheap. Well, you got to start somewhere. Conversation does move towards actionable results. And one of the things that I've learned in Gale Force Wins is that the journeys that we've profiled, we've got a lot of feedback. Like, people have told me, I've quit my job. I find that a little heavy when people say that. Yeah, you better have your act together if you're going to quit your job. Right?
Absolutely. You got to know, and it's all about knowing the timing, right? The timing has to be right as an individual, no matter what you're doing, and you have to keep that number one. And it doesn't mean you have to give up all one to do the other. You can do both. You can still continue whatever you're doing in your career at full time, and you can take whatever time you have available to continue to work on your sidelines, thing you might want to develop bigger a little bit later, maybe when you're in a better position in life, from varying degrees. So it depends, where you're at in your career, where you're at in your life. You're still raising children, all these things that require money to do. So you have to weigh it out and do it right. You got to lay out a plan. Any plan, you can look at that plan as a business plan. If you're not laying it out you know, it can be the best ideas, but the timing is equally important as when you implement those ideas. So things have to be implemented at various stages at the right time.
Yeah.
For you as an individual or your company, it's the same thing. And I'm sure you've gone through that with yourself, transitioning into Gale Force Wins, right? You've made a transition into entrepreneurship from having previously worked in the media industry as a director and so forth, getting paid by a corporation and so forth. But you moved from that, I think 5 years ago, into more of an entrepreneurial pursuit.
Yeah.
Of where you got with that, but the timing was right for you in your life.
Well,
in many ways.
You're right, Wayne. And you know, given that I have, you know, my entire career has been 100% commission sales, you would think that it'd be a no-brainer for me to just transition into my own business, but it wasn't. It was a very agonizing decision to try and figure out, you know, how do we build up enough clients? Cash flow is incredibly important. But, you know, I think one thing I want to say, and I kind of know where your head is on this, but I like entrepreneurship because it absolutely forces you to get many, many aspects of your life together. It's you know, when you're in the mode, and I'm not being critical, you and I've talked about this, when you're in the mode of a paycheck is coming, there's complacency, and complacency is the death knell for innovation and feeling good, frankly. Where are you going to get your confidence level up if you can figure out a way of creating something yourself? You've been there, and this is why you've inspired me so long, because you came out of university and went headlong into the entrepreneurial world. You've deviated a little bit, but timing is right. For you and the moves you made, timing was right to do what you did. But I think back to the entrepreneurial thing, if we could get more Newfoundlanders to step out of their company and become entrepreneurial, maybe it's a sideline. You don't need to make $10,000 a month. If you have a sideline that X amount of hours a month and you bring in $1,000 or $2,000, yeah, it becomes, who knows, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple in a garage, and now it's one of the largest companies in the world. So you got to start somewhere. You do, and even if you're not interested in that, because not everybody is, in the job that you're doing for somebody else, you can develop a very entrepreneurial mindset, an entrepreneurial way of thinking that helps that company, and it brings your value level up, because you're providing more value now. Even though you don't want to own it, you don't want to be the business person, you don't want to do those things, but you're really good at what you do that helps that business. Having an entrepreneurial mindset toward the business, it doesn't mean you got to do it yourself. It means that's another, what I talked about earlier, that's the value you're bringing to the table. And that's okay. You don't have to want to do all the other things. You just, if you're happy with what you're doing and figure out how your value lines up with everything else that you're into, that's the key. Yeah. Once you line up your value, you don't need to be the owner or the investor. You need to bring value. I agree. And, you know, I think back to Newfoundland and Labrador, there's an enormous, well, I don't know. I'm not saying enormous, I probably shouldn't say that, but there's a percentage of the population that is critical. And I understand you had to be critical, but critical for the sake of being critical is no good. If we're critical and not offering a solution, that's just being critical. If you're critical and say, well, here's what I think would fix it, then I think that would be a much better way of approaching it, wouldn't you? Absolutely. And I say to people all the time, it's great to bring me the problems and what's wrong with everything, but, you know, the back end of that now, couple some solutions that you feel, as a subject matter expert that you are in this area, you bring some solutions too. Okay, you've identified the problems. Okay, now we can all agree and disagree on problems. We'll identify those. But why don't you help me bring some solutions from your perspective? Value. Bring your value. Anybody can be a complainer, and that's fine, but bring the value. Yeah. The value piece is in the solutions that matches the problems you just identified, right? Or the beginning conversations around developing a solution. That's the key, again, is identifying your value. Doesn't matter what other people think of you. You know your value. Bring that value to the table in terms of developing solutions. So if you're the subject matter expert in something that you've identified all kinds of problems with and complaints of, and you bring it to me, and I say to you,
That's perfect, but that's 50% of the road. Now give me the other 50. Give me solutions from your perspective that can be final solutions or can be the beginning of discussions that lead to final solutions. That's the key, right? So that's about bringing value, your value to you is give me the value, like me forcing the value out of you as well. Because if all you want to do is be negative, and you just identified, many are, then why don't the negativity have to come with solutions?
Yeah.
So if everything is wrong and everybody's bad and then everybody's a crook, well, bring your accountability. So if you dislike your local public office person, whatever that might be, and you're going to sit on a social media somewhere, call them all kinds of names, and criticize them, that's 50%. The other 50% is let's see your name on the ballot next time when that public office opens up for election.
That's right.
Other 50%. Now you're going to bring all these solutions and your value I'm talking about. Well, let's get you in that office and bring your solutions. Easy to identify everything is wrong, but you better come up with the other 50% and put your name on the ballot. Bring your solutions to that.
I got an example.
Better. So that's my belief. And I've done that too.
Well,
in the public office.
I know you have, and that's why you have my immense
very
respect.
challenging experience.
You've given to your community.
That's another whole conversation.
Well, I think you're right, though. I'll never forget I was coaching hockey for my son for about a decade, and this one time I was the only parent on the ice, the only coach. I don't know where everyone else was, and this other parent came over to me and said, that was a shitty practice. And I looked at him and I'm like, I spent 2 hours, Wayne, preparing for that practice. Yeah. And I said to him, no problem. Bring your skates. Get on the ice with me next week. No, never did.
Never showed up.
If he brought his skates the next week, then I would have had a lot more respect for him. My respect level for him, this comment was made about 15 years ago. I still have zero respect for you. And my point, though, is that, to your point, we need more people to step up. Elected officials, no matter what, we can all be critical of them, but they don't get up in the morning to say, how am I going to screw up Newfoundland and Labrador? I don't care what party you are. The fact that they're a politician means they're incredibly optimistic and they have thick skins.
You'd have to be, wouldn't you?
Right?
Yeah.
So I think what I would like to see is a lot more focus in Newfoundland and Labrador on respect for business people. They're not all out screwing the tax system and all these, whatever these negative comments are, and I hear that in my own family. This is not the way we need to move forward. We need to have immense respect for everyone and try and lift this province at a time when it needs to be lifted, because back to the mining sector. The mining sector is going to bring, I remember Premier Fury saying to us, there's about 25,000 jobs needed in Newfoundland and Labrador. I can't remember how many of them are in the mining sector. But I mean, you look at Argentia, Wayne, they have a laydown area on the old tarmac of the airport that was built in 1941, and it's the monopiles, not monopods, they're called monopiles. There's huge cylindrical white things that keep the wind turbines aloft. They're made in Europe, they're laid down there, and then they go down to the United States whenever one needs
that's
to be
for the
replaced.
offshore wind, is it? Yeah.
Right. There's offshore wind there. There's so much going on in Argentia. Like, we literally could talk about all the pockets of Newfoundland and Labrador. And the thing about Newfoundland that's so intriguing is there's deep ports. I mean, Bull Arm, I'm not sure how much I can reveal, but I was on a call the other day. The government of Canada is looking at Bull Arm for some safety and security activity in Bull Arm. That is exciting, because it's one thing to build a ship, it's one thing to build Bull Arm, but if you're going to maintain something for 100 years, think about the offshoot to that, deep water ports that can go anywhere in the world. Yeah. Man, it's huge.
There is, and I'm not going to get into the whole airport situation in Stephenville, but if you look at the intrinsic value that had when it was still a community, organization, to what it became, and the value got lost. So there's so much value that could have been created out of that to really bring solutions to the problems, because there's a lot of economic, social problems, right? And we can protest economic development all we want, but that's one of the biggest solutions to it.
Yeah.
So we have to develop that. And we also have to be partnered with that and bring our value to it Environmental, we've talked about these issues in the past. Environmental issues, we want to make sure everything is done properly and not destroying your future, right?
Yeah.
It's very important. But there's where you can highlight all the negative things that's wrong with Gerry Carew Incorporated's aspirations for development in a certain field. But again, where's the other 50% of that? Where am I bringing the solutions? If I got all these things that are wrong, I need to bring solutions. And then that's where we can work together to work through it, right? But again, so much lost value in those examples there too. And that's what I'm getting at. That's where Newfoundland Labrador has just to really focus on value. What are we getting out of this? Why are we in the situations we're in from the last 100 years? Fishery, Churchill Falls.
Yeah.
How did we get there? And we haven't learned from that we're not getting the value out of that, right? Because as disastrous as some of the things have been, if we don't learn, then we lost value out of it. Because even the bad things carry value. They have value, but if you don't get the value out of that, it's completely lost. It is a failure. But if we take a look at the values of the things, and even in business, the things we've done and failed at, if we don't take the lessons out of that, we're not getting value out of it. Yeah. We're letting the value go with the failure. It's not a failure if you're carrying value. And taking value out of it makes it a success, no matter what other ways you may measure that. So it's that's where our focus has to be in terms of just being positive, not negative. If you want to be positive, you got to bring solutions to the table. If you want to be negative, you got to bring solutions to the table. And that's accountability. And I think what we've lost in society in the recent times is accountability. I can call you names on the internet, but I'm not held accountable. I can commit crimes, I'm not held accountable. Accountability is personal accountability, individual accountability is what we all got to start bringing back to our own comments and our own things, because we're very, we're very concerned about the development of our communities. If that's the case, then bring constructive solutions to what's going to help that work in partnership with development.
Wayne, look, we've been talking now for 46 minutes. We'll conclude this up shortly, but back to a point you made about competitiveness and United States and Canada. And I think I sent you an article recently. It came into my inbox from, I subscribe to a lot of different newsletters, and if I remember correctly, it was called Means and Ways. I can't remember the name of the lady who wrote it, but it was talking about the United States way of doing things versus, and then we're talking business here, not politics, business versus, the Canadian way. And her criticism of Canada was that many of us, even business people, have our hand out to government and try to let government in Canada figure it all out. In the United States, if there's a problem, they let economics and business people figure it out and then disseminate it. I think there's a lot more of that kind of thinking that has to be permeating Newfoundland and Labrador and all of Canada to make our productivity go up, because that's another thing. Our productivity has shrunk, and that is alarming.
And to beat a dead horse, I guess I'm going back to my value proposition again. It's all in what those things, bringing value out of all those things, and good, bad, negative, and positive. It's the value you take of it, and then what do you do with that value? And several times in your comments you mentioned the how. Because I heard you say how many times, and that's what I talked about earlier. It's how are we doing it? How are we going to do it? How do you do that? How do you make that work for you? And the how makes you think more. Because it's easy to say I do it that way, but when someone says, how do you do that? Why do you do that? That involves brings you into a whole deeper level of thinking about the processes that you're using and the value you're getting out of them. Back to value you're getting out of them, right? So that's the intrinsic value. If I'm going to complain on the internet, what solutions am I bringing to create value?
Yeah.
I'm just a whiner.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be that, I hope. So you can highlight what's wrong with things in your own opinion, but bring the solution too. Bring an offering of solution or the beginnings of a discussion toward a solution. That's the value in what you're saying. That's the value you can bring. Even if you think everything is rotten, bring value. Bring solutions.
Well, Wayne, what you've brought to me today is an enormous amount of value, and you continue to do that. In my life, I value certain people, my family. Wayne Howlett is one of those guys, and I think value is a word that we don't talk about enough. This has been an amazing conversation for me today, and it's something that we've threatened to do, to post this and see where it goes. What I'd like to do is encourage people to visit you on LinkedIn, Wayne Howlett. He's on LinkedIn, posts a lot of positive stuff. Follow Gale Force Wins. Comment. I want to get a conversation going. Myself and Wayne, we would love to hear from you. What do you think can be done to help Newfoundland and Labrador take its rightful place in an economic powerhouse that I think it's going to be and can be?
Absolutely, and I think that would be wonderful to see is respectful commentary about. I disagree with what you said on that, Gerry. Here's what I think, and here's a way we could make that work. So that's being, having a debate, but bringing your ideas of solutions to it. The value just keeps creating, growing on itself exponentially. The more positive conversations, respectful conversations that we can disagree on, the more value starts to build.
Yeah.
And God knows, remember the old saying, you had, was it 51 ideas to get one?
Yeah.
Or whatever the numbers were. You had to have 51 ideas on the table. And out of that value came one that the company moved on with. Right? Remember those? I don't know if they do that anymore, but those in the older days.
Yeah.
That's how the corporations often approached problems and opportunities.
Well, folks, last word went to Wayne Howlett. This is Gale Force Wins, and it's my pleasure to be able to sit with someone that we forged a relationship well over 30 years ago now. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Send us your comments. Like, share, do all those things. We need the positivity to flow.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Wins. That's Gale Force Wins, WINS.com.